Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to provide an update to the bull market support band. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. So we have seen a pretty nice move by Bitcoin back up this past week. It went up about 7 to 8%. And this is in line with some of the things we talked about in the sense that historically, well, at least last cycle, we saw Bitcoin stay above its bull market support band until Bitcoin dominance had topped. Now, that raises the question, well, how do you know where Bitcoin dominance has topped? I've provided my reasoning many times over the last 2.5 years as to why I don't think Bitcoin dominance has topped. I ultimately think it's probably going to top somewhere around 60%. So because I think that, I think it makes sense for Bitcoin to, still chop around. And one of the reasons is simply because when you think about, alt Bitcoin pairs, as long as there's liquidity there, Bitcoin can tap into that liquidity to use as sort of fuel to stay above its 20-week SMA. One thing to remember, last cycle in 2019, just before rate cuts arrived, one thing to remember is that ETH Bitcoin actually bottomed before Bitcoin fell below its 20-week moving average. Right? You see that pretty clearly, right? ETH Bitcoin bottomed before Bitcoin fell below the 20-week SMA. And it makes a lot of sense when you think about it, right? It really does. Because as long as people are converting their ETH to Bitcoin, Bitcoin holds the line. But once everyone who's been convinced to convert has already converted, and you've only now down to the people that are going to hold no matter what, once you sort of reach that point where no one is longer converting their ETH to Bitcoin, there's like a source of liquidity that sort of dries up. And then Bitcoin falls below the 20-week SMA after alt Bitcoin pairs bottom. Because I don't think Bitcoin dominance has topped yet. It really does still seem somewhat similar. Now, that doesn't mean Bitcoin can't run the highs. I've said that before. Even last year, we saw something like that play out where, you had basically and again, there's going to be a lot of people out there that'll say it can do more than run the highs, right? And go much higher. And again, like I've said before, I'm not going to try to stand in the way. I just think heavy, Bitcoin heavy would make more sense than altcoin heavy until dominance is at 60%. Bitcoin gives you more exposure to the upside. It minimizes your downside risk. It's hard to say, right? I don't have a crystal ball, but even in 2023, Bitcoin started to get a little bit of a rally here about week 9 or so, right? Really around week 9 or so. And from here, last week was week 9. And so that seems somewhat familiar, right? And here you can see it actually ended up sweeping the highs. But there's another counterpoint, though, to sweeping the highs, and that's sort of your 2019 rally, where it didn't actually quite make it to the high, right? It ended up being a lower high. And it's similar type of thing, right? We sort of had a June high, a lower high in July, and then another lower high in August. So sort of three back-to-back, three highs, right? 1 month apart. This cycle, theoretically, just before rate cuts, you also kind of have the same thing, right? You have a high in March, and then you have this lower high in April. Now, if you connect it to the wick and you take a sort of a price label, that would get you, around 70K, maybe between 70 to 71K. If you connect it to the sort of the daily close, that would put you, maybe slightly above where we currently are, but not a lot. You could also connect these dots and say that's kind of right where we are right now, right? Connecting that dot to that dot, saying that's where we are. But the point, right? The point is, I don't know where it's going to go in the short term, is the truth. The point, though, is that we talked about this a lot, where when you get into these trends, like when Bitcoin's trending down, it is rallies often. And it can sometimes be dumps, but what's more effective to break all Bitcoin pairs down are rallies by Bitcoin. And when you get back above that 8-week SMA, just like you did in 2019, right? We got back above it right here. We had a 2-week rally. And this here, during that 2-week rally, Bitcoin dominance absolutely soared during that 2-week rally by Bitcoin USD. If we overlay Bitcoin dominance onto the chart, you'll see what I'm talking about, right? Don't take my word for it. Don't trust, verify. So Bitcoin dominance opened up that week around 67, 68%. By the 2 weeks later, it was all the way up near 71%, right? That's a huge move in only a very short period of time. I mean, 2 to 3% higher in terms of just going percentage wise. We opened up last week by dominance just below 55%, right? So that could theoretically get you to that 57, 58% level, which would be in line with sort of what we talked about, where Bitcoin dominance swept the high a month ago. It takes about 5 to 6 weeks to get back above it and durably go to much higher levels. So that is really playing out in a really similar fashion so far. So again, if you see Bitcoin continue the route, this is the hard part for all. It's because it just seems like there's not a great outcome for all Bitcoin pairs, because if Bitcoin rallies, then Bitcoin dominance goes up, right? But we also saw a couple of weeks ago when Bitcoin got this dump over here in April, Bitcoin dominance also went up. So it's kind of like what I've said for the last 2.5 years: no matter the direction of Bitcoin USD, all Bitcoin pairs bleed. And so that's still where I am on this. I still feel like this is just chopping the altcoin market up. And it's so true, though. A lot of these cryptocurrencies a lot of the altcoins are still struggling. Some of them are still doing well, but most of them are struggling. And again, if you were to overlay, say, like ETH USD onto this chart, look at ETH USD compared to Bitcoin. Bitcoin hasn't really gone down that much, whereas ETH USD has gone down quite a lot. And it's because Bitcoin hasn't gone down as much because people are converting their ETH to Bitcoin. But again, I think that trend is going to end this summer, is my guess. So yeah, Bitcoin's still sort of chopping around this range, and very, very, very similar to what we saw not only in 2023, but also in 2019. In both cases, we had rallies back above the 8-week SMA. In 2023, when we had that rally, we went to a new high. In 2019, when we had that rally, it was a lower high. If you look at the social risk in 2023, when we went to a new high, social risk was around 0.1 to 0.2. Today, it's a lot lower, right? To me, this really does look similar to sort of mid 2019. But again, you also have the spot ETFs. We didn't have those, back in the day. So I'm not trying to step on anyone's toes. I don't want to step on anyone's toes here, but it does seem somewhat familiar, right? It does seem somewhat familiar. So, but yeah, we did talk about at some point we're going to sort of wick down to the bull market support band, and normally on that wick, like you often see, you sort of get a knee-jerk reaction off of it, right? And that's actually a pretty common thing. You see it right there too. And that was actually a 2-week rally as well. But a lot of times you'll sort of get a knee-jerk reaction off that 20-week moving average, and it'll go back up. But if it comes back down to it, that's where sort of the real test is. And again, there's no guarantee that we do. There's certainly examples of 2017 where you only sort of get these wicks, right? There are examples like that. So that is, if you want to see a left translated peak, that's what it would look like, But if you don't get a left translated peak and it's just sort of a normal, and again, this is sort of the thing that no one will want to talk about, but there does exist a scenario where you have a left translated peak where the peak's already in, right? There's also left translated peak scenarios where the peak's not until, say, December or something, which I think a lot, people obviously like that idea a lot more. But I think with investing, you always have to consider all possible outcomes, right? And of course, the idea of a left translated peak is notable, especially given monetary policy in the context of what we've seen historically and what happened in sort of the election years of past. But right now the 20-week SMA for Bitcoin is at 59K. 21-week EMA is at 58.7K. 8-week SMA is at 65.2. So, historically, a lot of times when you get above the 8-week SMA, you'll then stay above it for at least a week. At least that's what you saw back over here, right? You saw it get above it, and then 1 week later, it stayed above it. 2019, same thing. You got above it, and then we stayed above it the following week. So I think what'll be more interesting is not what happens this week, but what happens next week, right? Because this week you might have the spot ETF, Ethereum, rejection according to the markets. Again, I have no insight into whether it's going to be approved or not. Frankly, I don't really care. Honestly, I would prefer that it gets approved so that we don't have to think about it. That it just, that's probably what I would say I would just prefer it gets approved. But if the markets are right and it doesn't get approved, then that's just more reason for people to convert their ETH to Bitcoin in the short term. So I'd actually be more interested in what's going to happen next week, not this week. Because this week, it could just be more of the same. It could just be more of what we saw this past week, right? Bitcoin takes fuel from the altcoin market, and those altcoins just keep on bleeding on their Bitcoin pairs. So we'll see. And by the way, certainly other markets, some of these markets could also make you think that, all right, well, maybe it's not even this week that it happens. Because a lot of times when you wick down to the 20-week, you immediately go up. We sort of hesitated this time. So we'll see. You could always get a sort of an intermediate week where it just sort of slowly comes back down and then goes back up. But my sort of my base case that I've been saying this for months is that Bitcoin chops the altcoin market up here, and then once that liquidity has been bled dry, then Bitcoin is free to sort of have a larger correction, right? And again, that doesn't necessarily have to mean all doom and gloom, but who knows? That could still be weeks away. It could be months away. I don't know how long the degens are going to hold out. They sure as hell have held out longer than I thought they were going to. So I tip my hat to them. But that's where we stand right now. I'd like to see kind of where this ultimately pans out over the next 2 weeks. I think the next 2 weeks are going to be fairly instrumental in sort of defining whether this is sort of a mid 2019 style event or something different. The next couple of weeks should define that. So we will see. I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. Thank you guys for tuning in. Again, we do have Into the Cryptoverse Premium and intothecryptoverse.com, where we talk about a lot more stuff on there than I do on here. But or we go into more detail and we talk a lot about other markets as well. So make sure you check that out. Links in the description below. But other than that, I will see you guys next time. And thumbs up on the video if you don't mind. See you guys next time. Bye.